and gratified that we're doing this. As you know, having South-South dialogue is very important for our parts of the world, and the more interchanges and exchanges that we have along those fronts are certainly welcome. I know from my end, and I'm sure from the IDDF's end. So thank you for the invitation. And I want to start with, expressing my condolences on the many lives lost in this senseless war, really. We're talking about over 1,500 dead in Iran, over 1,000 dead in Lebanon, hundreds in Iraq, tens in the Gulf states and Israel, and all of these lives could have been spared if wisdom had prevailed prior to the war. And let me start with the bigger framing issue. This is an illegal war that was waged by the US and Israel on Iran, as it is also an illegal war or attacks waged by Iran on the Gulf states. Both should be condemned, both should end right away, and we can do better than continuing in this endless zone of conflict. We speak in the fourth week of the war. We in the Gulf states have sustained over 5,000 attacks from our neighbor Iran, and this is quite unfortunate, with a lot of disruption to daily life. It did not spare any target. We are talking about not only military assets and bases, we're talking about civilian targets, we're talking about hotels, residential buildings, power plants, oil and gas installations, airports, and so on. And this compares to a very small fraction that was targeted at the main culprit, Israel, who only received close to 1,000 ballistic missiles and what have you targets from Iran. So it tells you the level of attention that the Gulf has received, even though the Gulf states are not a party to the war, as opposed to the unfortunate explanation that we hear from our neighbor Iran concerning us hosting US bases, and this is the rationale for them hitting the Gulf states, but there are no attacks being done from the Gulf bases, or the airspaces were not used. We can get more into that later on if you'd like, but we try to deliver that message, and it hasn't been seeping through, unfortunately. That said, of these 5,000 and plus attacks in the last 4 weeks, we've been holding our ground. We've been courageously defending our homelands. The interception rates for those ballistic missiles and drones has been very high, above 90%. And, it just speaks to an unnecessary war that we ended up going into, which, if we look at the bigger issue, you know, Iran is holding up. They're trying to fight a fight of existence in their view. It's a war of choice from the American side that could have been averted. And if you look at the third belligerent, Israel, it's a continuation of a chaotic agenda to sow chaos and fragmentation in the region in a post-October 7 landscape. Let me pull back and look at the bigger picture. I think that would be a better way to think of then regional order or disorder, that is, Gulf security, and how to think of it in light of the ongoing war. So I like to start with thinking of the Middle East region, the larger Middle East, into two circles, if you may, two overlapping zones. One, let's call it a circle of fragility, and the other a circle of fluidity. And they come in tiers. And what do I mean by fragility? By fragility, I'm talking about the notion of human security being compromised over and over again in the Middle East. We're facing different layers of it. So you have the basic premise of humans being compromised. And that's why I started with human lives that are being lost across the board, regardless of nationality. A second layer speaks to unsustainable metrics that we're facing in the region, that we ought to focus our attention on as opposed to going from one war to the other. And by these metrics, I'm talking about water security, food security. As you know, we're in a very challenged space, which isn't as endowed in various parts of the region. So depletion has become more or less the story of the last few decades. Now, if you add a third layer of fragility, we can go and look at climate and climate change and climate risks. I talked to you today from Kuwait City, and we're facing, along with the southern Gulf region in particular, a monsoonish style weather, which is not quite typical, especially in this time of year. So that speaks to another layer of fragility that's haunting the Middle East. Now, tie this to a fourth layer, which speaks to the failure of leaderships in many countries across the Middle East. I'm talking about leadership structures, elite systems that are failing their people. They're not delivering the basic needs that they require. They're not meeting the aspirations of young, booming populations, which the Middle East is. And again, this is not the same across the board. There is a difference in there. And that's where I would introduce the second circle, the circle of fluidity. Here, I think the Gulf states come in at center stage, as opposed to the fragility circle where we see mostly the non-Gulf states within the region occupying center stage. And by fluidity, I'm talking about the ability to adapt, to be nimble, having a sense of endowment in terms of financials and capital, and the willingness to take risk and persevere and advance your interest. Now, these two circles are not distinct, as I mentioned, they overlap. And there is no better exemplification of this overlap than what we're going through today in the Middle East, as the Gulf is also embroiled in the current war. Now, what does that bode for the regional order, or disorder rather, that we've been facing for the past few years? And one could argue, even, we've been going from one war to another since the independence era of the mid 20th century, whether it's the Arab-Israeli wars or the other wars that have followed ever since within certain spaces. And to look, or to pontificate rather, about the regional, I'd rather step back and look at the global system and how is the global order shaping up, and what does that then bode for the Middle East and for other regions in the world. And I'm gonna give you a few candidate global orders. I just had a paper published actually yesterday on this. I'm happy to share the link if you're interested. It's open access, and it goes through the details of how I see the global orders fit and where the Middle East and the Gulf states manage themselves within. And I'll talk about five competing global orders. And I say competing because my argument is there is no clarity on where we're headed. If there is something to move on with, I would say is where we're moving through a fragmented landscape. So it's not quite clear which order will prevail over the other or whether we'll continue working with parallel global orders. So with the number one, the first one is the American-led global order, or what used to be called the unipolar moment back in the 1990s. Many around us would kiss this order goodbye, but I would beg to differ because if you look at the numbers today, we're still talking about the largest economy, we're still talking about the largest military, and when it comes to what's to come in the future, we're talking about leadership in technology and advanced or artificial intelligence, AI. So their moment hasn't been as strong as it was back in the 90s and the early 00s, but they still have something to offer to compete along the global landscape. So you still have that American-led order trying to preserve itself. Now, a second global order that's also on the rise, unfortunately, is an imperial global order. And here we have various, candidates that can come in, but again, America shines heavily in this bucket because not only of the actions that they've taken against Venezuela, against Iran, but also we've seen the rhetoric against Greenland slash Denmark, Canada, Panama, and the list really goes on. So I think that even if it's rhetorical, even if it doesn't go anywhere, putting it out there and with the few actual examples upon us in the last 2 months is quite concerning. And we see the same thing as well when we talk about Russia and Ukraine. The whole notion of an independent nation state being attacked, some lands being taken by force, that also speaks to an alarming precedent, which we haven't seen a parallel to really since the invasion and occupation of my country, Kuwait, in 1990. So that is a second candidate order that could rise in importance and relevance, and it could lead us to a new world order. Now, a third candidate, I would say, could be a return to the bipolar world era. But by bipolar, I'm not talking about the US, and obviously the Soviet Union is no longer there, and Russia doesn't qualify to be in that bucket. But I'm thinking US and China. Here we're talking about 27% of world GPE when it comes to the US, close to 19% world GDP contribution to the economy when it comes to China, and rising. So you see the rise of relevance in terms of where China comes in. Obviously, the economic model has been the one it's been focusing on, but we've seen China also rise in relevance when it comes to international affairs, mediation, and working with other countries on that front. And you go and you look at the rhetoric of Mr. Trump himself. He refers to China as one of the two superpowers in some of his many posts, sometimes called the G2 in reference to the Great Two, or the two powers. A fourth order, a candidate order that many have been talking about actually, is the multipolar world, where we see different states taking on different powers, burden sharing, becoming influential, maybe coming into their own spheres of influence. That has been also a topic that's been coming up much more frequently in the US. And you see also offshoots. So I'm thinking BRICS, I'm thinking the Asia Development Bank, several minilaterals that have come in. But that's yet to be developed into clear rules, clear red lines, clear, systems in place. It still needs more time to mature. And for those who advocate a multipolar world, world history has been more or less about a multipolar world. But let me remind you, in the 20th century, we entered two world wars within a multipolar world order. So it also comes with its challenges. And finally, where I think we can contribute to this discussion from the region, I propose an apolar world, where myself, other scholars in the region have been raising that flag in terms of not looking at the world through the lenses of polarity. Why should there be gravitations towards one country or region or the other? But instead, to look to decenter the nation state and to look at connectivity as a metaphor, economic corridors, development roads, vision plans. And, today it's quite confusing when it comes to who's calling the shots. And there are precedents actually in world history. I mean, you have today large corporations and conglomerates like Meta, Amazon, Alibaba, who have the weight of sometimes even more than the nation state. And we've seen this in history before. I'm thinking the East India Company, the Dutch East Indies, and so on. So I would keep these different orders in place and argue that they are on display in the Middle East, depending on who you're talking to and who's trying to impose his will in place. There are many standing assumptions, systems of thought, networks, and that has come to a breaking point, I would say, with the events of October 7 and what followed after October 7. The Hamas attack on Israel, the Israeli retaliation on not only Hamas, but on anything that touches Palestine, that amounted, in the views of many scholars, of genocide and international law, to a genocide in the making, which we need to grapple with, and obviously to the sidestepping of all red lines and rules of engagement that we know of. Now, enter the Arab world into this conundrum, and you'll notice that pre-2023 and post-2023, if you're looking at the Middle East in general, you'll see that there has been the dominance, I would say, of non-Arab states in running the affairs of the region. And here I'm thinking of Iran, Israel and Turkey, each having a vision for the region and trying to pursue it in a very diligent manner. We can get into what each vision is later on if you like, but lacking on the other side is a nominal or a clear, concrete Arab vision. That hasn't been forthcoming, unfortunately, even though, Arab states are the majority in the region, but they've not been able to get themselves in a very concrete, cohesive manner, and that opened up then the space for other countries to intervene in their affairs, whether it's Israel occupying Arab lands, right and left, whether it's Iran with its proxy network meddling into the affairs of different Arab states, and so on. I think we can develop, and that's where I would argue, we can develop a regional system that would accommodate not only the Arab states, but everyone, included in the region, through the efforts of the Gulf region. Now, mind you, the Gulf region has been marginal to the Middle East for the longest time. And if you go back in history with me, I think it rose to importance to many watchers, scholars, politicians, you name it, with the 1970s onwards with the oil shock and the oil crisis. And it's ironic I say this now because we're going through another oil shock as we speak today, obviously of a different nature, but an oil shock nonetheless. And that usually colors the way that people look at the Gulf region. Either that or, they'll think of Islam or variations of Islam and its topic when they think of unfortunate renditions like terrorism or violent
This
extremism.
is
They'll think about the
57 hours.
tribes.
Abi.
Let me just mute the person. Okay. They'll think about the tribes as a social unit, and that tends to come, unfortunately, from the outside. And I think in the last decade or two, we've seen an interest from the region to better represent itself and put itself out there, to be defined by itself. Obviously, not everything that we get from the external space is negative. I mean, there are many things that are worth listening to, subscribing to, collaborating with. But I think looking at matters from within give you a much more uh, profound outlook about the region. And by looking at the Middle East from within, you normalize it. And it becomes just like any other geographic space with its limitations, with its challenges, with its opportunities. And this way, we're de-exceptionalizing the Middle East and the Arab Gulf states. And that's how I think we should move forward. The Gulf has a lot going for it. And I'll start with how they came together as a Gulf conglomerate. This was a cooperation council that was created by 6 member states in 1981, looking at security as an essential component, something that keeps returning as the primary issue for us. I mean, we had the Iran-Iraq war in the 80s, the invasion of Kuwait in 1990. We had the US invasion of Iraq in 2003, the Arab protests, the Yemen war, the civil wars and then unfollowed in the region, whether it's in Libya, Sudan, Yemen, Syria. So security is right front and center. It's you cannot move with your own, objectives and goals in life when you don't have a secure space. So that came in at the beginning of bringing in the Gulf states, but they have more than trying to preserve security. They have a lot of things going for them as common countries. And I'm here talking about Kuwait, Bahrain, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, United Arab Emirates, and Oman. We have common blood, kinship, customs, openness. Obviously, I'm focusing on the Gulf, but I like to use the word Arabian Peninsula because I think we can lump in Yemen and Iraq into that conversation as well because of those common traits. We have financial clout, resilience. Gulf sovereign wealth funds are close to 40% of the total sovereign wealth funds worldwide. We're talking about trillions of dollars. They're not passive actors. If they wanted to use that capital collectively, they can reach quite high fronts, higher heights. And in terms of oil and gas, the Gulf is ranked first when it comes to energy indices, crude oil exports, not in the last 4 weeks, unfortunately, because of the closure of Hormuz, effectively by Iran. But in general, this has been also seen in production and reserves in the past. Diplomatic prowess is another beneficial element that we've seen come through, not only through mediation, that's been, something that different countries have worked on different files, but also on the ability to connect to different parties within the Middle East and beyond. If you look at the Middle East region, for example, within the Gulf, you have voices that talk to all parties, whether it's Iran, Israel, and the other countries in the region. There is also technical adeptness and willingness to explore the AI miracle. You're seeing investments, especially in the UAE and Saudi Arabia, in the billions. You're seeing infrastructure that's being built and unfortunately being attacked by Iran as well as we speak. You have a futuristic mindset where national visions are guiding the plans forward and with an attempt to move beyond oil into how they evolve and develop themselves as countries. And you also, of course, see cultural innovation, the understanding that this needs to be a global center. You've seen the World Cup hosted before, expected to be hosted again in a few years in Saudi Arabia, expos, and what have you. And again, the biggest asset, obviously, for the Gulf is its people. You have a youth, booming population, you have an educated populace. We're close to 58 million per the latest stats from the GCC as of 2 years ago. Small in number, obviously, I'm talking to in a think tank based in India, so this is very small, but quality nonetheless. So how would you build a Gulf-based order that can try to pull in the different elements that have been fighting it out? And we've been seeing, I mean, the big plot and the big narrative in the region is the occupation of Palestine. This tends to be forgotten, but I think this is the root problem that has caused a lot of issues. Or it has also been used by certain countries like Iran, for example, and other groups as a rationale for pursuing certain policies that may not be to the liking of its neighbors. So Palestine is key. We've been very supportive of the two-state solution. Saudi Arabia even launched, along with the EU and Norway, a global alliance 2 years ago to implement the two-state solution. Not out of naivete, we know that, given the ongoing encroachment of Israel, they're imposing a de facto one-state solution. But we want to maintain that international call so when the willingness is there, that we can move into that action. Now, that's an important element. And so is the need to open up with Iran and to discuss all different elements in a very clear manner. I've been saying this before the war, I say during the war, and I think it needs to happen right now and even after the war. Our fates in the region should not be determined by outside parties. We should be able to discuss our issues directly with our neighbors, and we should lay them all on the table. We've had an issue with the proxy battling that's been happening in the Middle East for quite some time. Only yesterday, for example, Kuwait uncovered a third sleeper cell, a Hezbollah Iran supported sleeper cell. There was one also that was uncovered in the UAE, and that doesn't bode well when it comes to neighborly relations. We have not meddled into the affairs of Iran, and we expect the same thing from them. So that's the kind of behavior that we would like to entice Iran into. And I think it should go beyond rhetoric from the Gulf side. We should invest in partnerships. We should provide incentives for that change in behavior. Because the regime, as it stands, is willing to negotiate. It hasn't been privy to not negotiating. And let's not forget, they were on the negotiation table twice, and America departed at both times to launch a war, both in 2025, led by Israel then, and jointly with Israel as of last month. So how to deal with Iran is an important issue. We need to look at proxies. We need to look at the nuclear weapon. And that also needs to be tied to how Israel is managing their nuclear weapon because they do own one. So, having a nuclear-free region is best for everyone. And obviously the missiles program and a fourth issue that I would add, because it's becoming much more relevant now, not only to the region, but to the whole world is the issue of safety of passage, maritime security, the Strait of Hormuz. Those things are guided by international law, but because it's been violated over and over again by all belligerents in the war, really. I mean, I'm thinking here Iran, Israel, and the US. We're seeing laws being obstructed by all these different parties at different levels, mind you, but still being obstructed nonetheless. And I think what we can do is both with Israel, with Iran, with other parties to bring in calm and quiet is we need to insert some of the things that worked for the Gulf before. This sense of pragmatism, fluidity that I spoke at the beginning, a balanced view, the willingness to talk to others and to be in their shoes. Because if you're not looking at things from their own notion, things are not going to move forward. And I think there are opportunities. We've seen the Gulf support Syria, and that has become, though challenged still, but in a much better position than other critical spaces like Sudan, like Yemen, like Libya. So I think we need to tackle things as we move around. We're not going to be able to have a unified vision across all these different countries. But we cannot also accept any single country to impose its will on the others. And that's what I've meant by the post-October 7 mindset that we saw on display by Israel, trying to push its way through violence and force. And, by killing leaderships, by killing people, by decimating people, by changing matters on the ground. That has served their tactics for now, but it doesn't bode well for regional security. You can't operate this way and expect other countries to abide by your interests. And obviously, the Middle East, the Gulf, is not separate from its larger neighborhood. And here I'm thinking India, I'm thinking China, the Horn of Africa. We need to also work collaboratively with these spaces. We've started working with them very collaboratively, and we've seen different nodes and networks underway. Us talking to one another is yet another example of that interest. And I think the more we can go local, organic, regional, the more we can endure the troubles of wars such as the ones that we're going through today. I have much more to say about the current moment, but I've promised our hosts to do half an hour, and I think I've succeeded. I'm a minute early. I'll stop here. Thank you for your time and for your attention, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Okay. Thank you so much for this insightful discussion. We can take up some questions now. We have a number of people. I think Dr. Omer Anas is here. He's Director Research of IDDF Research Foundation. He has joined from Ankara. Dr. Omer Anas, if you could ask something.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Dr. Badr. It is indeed an educating and very insightful and one of the most important questions which you also have answered briefly in your presentation, and I would like to ask once again. For sure, we have seen that the Gulf region, Gulf countries have got so much mistrust about their security and defense relations with the United States. And as a result, there are discussions that they are going to revise that security partnership with the United States and would like to evolve something which might be different from the existing one, which means that there is going to be a revision of security architecture of the region. However, the fact is that the Chinese and Russians are not much interested, in fact, not at all interested in taking any responsibility of security and defense in your region. So the only option which the region has is either to be under the American umbrella or evolve something slightly autonomous, maybe some sort of independent security architecture. So I would like to ask and understand from you to which direction the region would like to go, or whether it has the willingness and capability as well From my own understanding, as I am sitting in Ankara as a teacher of international relations, what I see is that Saudi Arabia, especially, and the United Arab Emirates have invested a lot in defense, include not just buying the weapons, but also in defense industry. So, if I look the trends of investment in defense industry, to me it looks like that they are more interested in evolving an independent security architecture for their region. So, I would like to understand from you. What do you have to say about this? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Omer, for this commentary. Look, let me distinguish between defense partnerships and security guarantees. The defense partnerships are not only with the US out of the Gulf, they span East and West. We work with different countries, including the country that you're now talking from, Turkey. There are various military partnerships with them and the Gulf states. And, uh, that investment in that defense partnership has borne its fruits as we speak today. We were able to withstand this Iranian aggression because of that preparation, that capacity building, training, and development with other countries. Access to weaponry that can, intercept all these missiles and drones. So that speaks to a wise approach that was taken. And that approach only it went into full force. I mean, we've had some dabbling with US military establishments, mainly from Bahrain and post World War II when it came to the Navy. The British were there, they were replaced by the American. Oman had a technical agreement in 1980. But the bulk of a lot of these defense partnerships really came after the liberation of Kuwait. It wasn't there before, and it was, if you have an existential threat of that kind when your country is wiped out, it would make sense to have those defense partnerships in place. But when it comes to security guarantees, rightly so, there hasn't been that clarity of purpose from the American side because they're going through their own evolution. And it's not the Carter Doctrine moment of the 1980 when, oil was seen as inviolable for the US. They were not the number one producers of oil at the time, so they took matters into their own hand when it came to securing the Gulf region. That's no longer there, and we've seen it happen over and over again in the last few years. We've seen it happen on the attacks in 2019 on Saudi oil fields that went unanswered by the US, the attacks on the Abu Dhabi's airport in 2022, the attacks on Udaid in 2025, and going into a war right now without even consulting their partners in the Gulf, in NATO, or anyone. I mean, they just went into war following through Israeli wishes, one could argue. And I think the best answer to all of this is yes, we'll continue working with the US because of that willingness. As you said, no other power has that openness to support militarily. But the better answer is to go, to increase your own agency, to have autonomy, and to also, by the way, develop a regional solution. We've had certain talks between Iran and the Gulf. It didn't bear any results up until then. But I think after seeing how things have transpired in this war, it behooves us to have that clarity of purpose. The Gulf states have proposed a regional security vision 2 years ago, and which was, brought and discussed, and we hoped others would join it. The Iranians have also presented the Hormuz Initiative prior to that, but both came with an Iran-centric or a Gulf-centric approach. My invitation to both sides is to come up with a combined approach where they can at least safeguard and protect their interests first. That's what we need. And we need to localize our defense production, which has started in the UAE and Saudi, by the way, in the last few years. Wars of the future are not what they used to be in the 80s and the 90s. You were talking about technology, you're talking about specific capabilities. So that can also factor into the ability to rise up on your own without needing to have a clear umbrella per se. So there is a short to medium answer with continuing our partnerships, but hopefully the long term would be to be more autonomous and connected to your region.
Yes, we have Mansoor Masrari. Yes, please ask a question and be very brief and to the point. Only a question, not a comment, please.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Badr. I would like to put a question in the form of a commentary that let's agree that the Gulf states are not united in position in front of the ongoing conflict, and they are a ground for other warring groups or warring parties. And the important security, especially the US security of the Gulf states, has not worked well. Don't you think that local, or as you refer to the regional engineering of the Gulf security, will cost less and work better for the Gulf states as well as for the neighboring countries, especially Yemen and Iraq, as you have referred? Because we in Yemen believe that it is the cohesive integrity of the Arabian Peninsula and go beyond the Gulf states to ensure the regional security from a local perspective and from regional perspective will work better than importing security from external partners who have their own priorities. Thank you.
May I request, Dr. Badr, can we take 2, 3 questions together?
Okay.
Okay, so we have Rehan Shireen. Rehan, can you open your mic and ask your question? Okay. Amir Nazir, please open your mic and ask the question.
Uh, thank you, Dr. Badr, for this talk. So I would like to ask a question regarding this security maximization. As this war highlighted the fragility in the region, so do you think this security maximization by the Gulf states, whether on its own, like in an independent tone, or with the defense partnership, will have a negative impact on like Iran and Gulf states relation? What will be the repercussions of this security maximization with Iran and Gulf states relation?
Yes, we have Ambassador Anil Kirgunayat. Sir, yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. It was very interesting to hear you, Dr. Badr, again. My question is, how do you see this war ending? And what will be the regional impact, if not the global impact of this war going forward?
Yes, Dr. Badr.
Okay. Thank you to the three questions. Brother Mansour, look, we again, like I said before, we cannot say that the defense partnerships with the US failed us, for the simple reason is we're living in a secure, protected area at the moment, thanks to the hard work of our military forces that have been accessing the best in class training from various parties, including in the US, with access to cutting edge technologies, which we wouldn't have been able to access if we didn't have these partnerships in place. So the situation would have been quite different if we were to get those Iranian attacks without having these trainings and technologies in place. So that's a given. But I do share your sentiment. I think down the line, we need to go autonomous. We need to focus on regional solutions for regional problems. And we need to enable our imagination to better work with ourselves. We can't count on outsiders forever, right? But that requires a lot of work. Because let me take you back in time to 1990, because that's taken usually as the point of fragmentation between Arab states, where different states, some sided with Kuwait, others sided with Iraq, even though we had a clear case of occupation. And I mentioned that case then because, interestingly and unfortunately, really, we see today close to 10 countries, 10 Arab states being attacked. 6 Gulf states, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, and we haven't seen any motion from the Arab League or any collaboration from the other Arab states to come in and support in a very diligent manner. And again, many of these states are unfortunately in dire conditions, granted, but to also see that there wasn't that clear formulation of how to move forward in such a dire situation. So it speaks to the need to develop a security doctrine. And we've been talking about this for decades. I think we need to step back from that big picture and take it in a piecemeal fashion. And if we do that, we'll probably get some results that can then offset us from dependency on other parties outside the region. In terms of Mr. Amir's question concerning security maximization within and how the relationship with the US would impact Iran, look, um, Iran, as well as the Gulf states and all states for that matter, are sovereign nation states who have to take what they think serves their best interests. And if the Gulf states decide to partner with the Chinese or with the Americans or with the Russians, none of these partnerships should be geared towards destabilizing any neighbor or any other country in the region, and vice versa. And that's been the spirit that's been carrying through our partnerships. That's why you've seen since, I mean, we've had them since the mid of 20th century. I've mentioned two cases in Bahrain and Oman with some obvious technical agreements across the Gulf, but the full push has come from 91 onwards. Now, nothing has, I mean, back then in the 90s and up to today, we are not the source of tension or threat on Iran. If anything, we were the ones who were trying the hardest to move away from this war. Uh, Spearheaded by our friends in Oman, they tried very hard in two negotiation cycles in 2025 and 2026, supported by the Gulf and communicated to Iran. So if all of this is unfortunately met with attacks from Iran on a daily basis, I don't think Iran is thinking of the day after because they're not going to go anywhere. We're not going to go anywhere. We're going to remain neighbors, and this is not how you treat a neighbor. Uh, so I hope that this, seeps into the Iranian mindset moving forward. As to the ambassador's question, there are various scenarios on how the war ends. I wrote a piece on this with a colleague from Chatham House, which I can also share a link to. But look, why war was never the answer. So going into war didn't make sense, nor did it meet any objective. Uh, the US objective was never clear to begin with, and the US was the one who was an anchor in getting this moving forward. Israel on its own wouldn't have been able to sustain the war at this level and all this time. For Israel, the objective is quite clear. Regime change cloaked in fragmentation and chaos if you don't get that sense of change. In the US, you keep hearing a different objective every single day. Is it the nuclear weapon? Is it the missiles? Is it the proxies? Is it uh, water access? It's not quite clear. And even yesterday, if you listen to Mr. Trump, he had a very interesting definition of regime change. He's like, yeah, we changed the regime because we killed everyone. So it's not quite clear how that's moving. From our standpoint in the Gulf, this is an internal issue for the Iranian people to decide on how they want to be governed, and no intervention will help change that. And you need to work with what you have. One scenario that could see its end is having a regime in place that's isolated, that's cornered, sanctioned, with a stalemate prospect, which would be very unappealing not only to Iran but to the whole region, because you're not addressing the root issue. Uh, Another one would be another scenario, which I think is far-fetched at this stage, but to have a very open negotiation, everyone is on the table, we clear our differences, we come up with clear rules, and life moves on. But I don't see this happening, unfortunately. A third worst scenario, which I hope we don't get into, is that the more the attacks continue, the more the assassinations continue, and all of this is illegal, of course, the more that you invite chaos into the country. And that chaos then will lead into lawless spaces, refugee flows, maybe radiation leaks, nuclear leaks. I mean, they were hitting Bushehr excessively yesterday. The Bushehr nuclear reactor, which has Russian supervision and management, some of them have flown even as in the recent days. Bushehr sits closer to Kuwait City than Tehran. So the stakes are high. And also, the stakes are high when it comes to, I hope we don't go there, but if the US ends up with a ground invasion or boots on the ground, they're going to remake another Vietnam, and it's going to open up another Pandora's box. And again, Kharq Island is closer to Kuwait City than it is to Tehran. So our fates are intertwined. And that's why we need to focus on stability. We need to ensure that peace and prosperity is shared by all. It's never, look, these things are never indivisible. They cannot be segmented. It has to be shared by the whole region because if everyone is benefiting, everyone moves forward together. That's our vision in the Gulf.
Okay, thank you. We can take this last round of questions. So I have 2, 3 questions. First one is about India treats the region as its extended neighborhood. So how, from a very Gulf perspective, how do you read India's stand or India's perspective on this whole war on Iran and India's role in the future, security order of the region? Second question was about Oman. I found the Omani stand, like in different statements by Abu Ali Saidi, Omani Wazir al-Khariji, and others. Like, do you find some exceptionalism from Oman, from the rest of GCC countries? Like you already had written a piece on Emirati and Saudi differences before this war emerged. So the differences between GCC countries and Arabian countries and how they will overcome on those differences while creating a regional security architecture.
Thank you. Let me start with the last question first. Indeed, and this speaks to also to a point our brother Mansour raised in the beginning of his question. Look, Gulf unity is key if you want to advance further unity with other parts of the region. And that hasn't always been manifested, unfortunately. And it's because of different visions, different ways of looking at things, and because of purely a lack of institutionalization. Sometimes personalized politics come into the game. A change of leadership can upend a lot of things that are going through, and those need to be sorted out. And I think we sort them out by having clarity of purpose on who we are. So the identity question needs to be answered, who we are as, citizens of this world, citizens of the region, of the Gulf space, and what do we aspire for? We need to agree on this, and then we need to agree on the paths to that vision. I think there is quite consensus towards a vision, but I think the paths to that vision differ within some of the Gulf states. In times of crises, we tend to bulk together, and you saw this happen. I mean, prior to the war, there was an Emirati-Saudi rift, namely over Yemen and over other spaces in the Middle East. But I mean, as of yesterday, there was a 6-country statement that came out, and it included Saudi and the UAE and other Gulf states and Jordan. We've seen them co-sponsor a UN Security Council resolution 2817 last week, which, by the way, that resolution, which condemns Iran's attacks on the Gulf, uh, had the biggest number of co-sponsorships. 136 countries co-sponsored it. I'm not sure if India is one of these, but I think it is. And it speaks to the support that the Gulf gets, and then for the Gulf from within, the need for them to maintain that unity because they're best listened to and best adhered to when they present that unified front. Will we have bumps down the road? Yes, because it's not an automatic button where you can switch things on and off to your liking. And this is politics. You need to work with what you have and to compromise and to move forward. Oman is one of the member states of the Gulf, and they have had a special relationship with Iran, and that has made them, shine when it comes to facilitating the 2015 JCPOA deal 10 years ago, 11 years ago, and then working together on putting something in the last 2 rounds of negotiations. And I think we can capitalize on this. This is an important step. And sometimes, look, having differences within the Gulf sometimes is uh, to the advantage of the Gulf because you can play through these differences to get to what's best. And the Omani role can come in handy. And let me say, actually, the Omani expression of critique towards the US was quite unprecedented. And during the war. First, you saw it in a rare appearance on US cable network a day before the war, where there was this appeal to not enter war. And then you saw it in that op-ed that you're referring to by the foreign minister, which rightly so, and I share the sentiment. I think U.S. foreign policy hasn't been fulfilled through this war, so I sympathize and support that sentiment. In terms of India, we look, our history with India is old and steeped and quite appreciated. Uh, when we were not as endowed of countries back in the day, India was the home of many families from the Gulf. And we were well received. We were able to find a home in India and work there. I'm talking not only from personal history, my family, but many other families across the Gulf. So that relationship continues because we saw then a phase in which many of our Indian brothers and sisters have found homes in the Gulf. And now we see a synergy in which there are various projects that are underway. Your leadership has been keen on advancing India-Gulf ties. We've seen various visits from both sides. We've seen a clear FTA signed between the UAE in particular and India and the Gulf as well. So this is important. We need to continue working on it. And I think we, in this larger neighborhood, we understand ourselves better, right? And I think we can advance so much together if we're unified. And I would add other spaces. I think a focus on sub-Saharan Africa is important. Looking at our other partners in Asia, because Asia is our biggest customer base, by the way, whether it's India, China, Vietnam, Japan, Korea. So we have, I mean, the US has been saying that they want to pivot to the East as they were, mired in forever wars, as they called it in the Middle East, although these were not wars of our making. I mean, the US had a role in them, but we've been in the East, we've been in Asia for much longer. So to us, it's not even a pivot; it's a natural home. And I hope that we can continue this not only on the political and economic, mind you, also on the cultural front. Maintaining those discussions and intellectual exchanges, I think, are also key to getting to know one another and enhance the relationship.
Yes, we can take this last question only from Karina Brown. Yes, please.
Hello,
Hi.
good afternoon, sir.
Hello.
Hello, sir. India should be given the role of mediator since we have good relation with the US, Israel, and Iran. How that possible?
Look, mediation is never reserved to any specific bloc or country or region. I think all countries can come in, and we've seen actually in this conflict, we've heard of three countries stepping up, and they come from different spaces, and we're talking Egypt, reportedly Turkey, and Pakistan. If India has the willingness, this is a question posed to our colleagues in the authorities, in the Indian authorities, and I think there will be reception, no doubt, to any effort that can stop the war.
Yes, Mrs. Karina.
Hello.
Oh, hi. Thank you. I'm here in the United States, and there's a lot of people in the United States that I know and I'm observing in social media and different sources that are upset with the US and Israel's actions. And for you that are and I have family that is living in Kuwait. And from you that are international, I am just curious as to what you would like to see from American citizens. And maybe you can't say that, but I just want you to know like that there's a lot of us that are concerned about the actions of our country. And I know that it's having a big negative impact on the world. And I know that there's going to be protests this Saturday all across the country. And so if you can say, what can US citizens do, in your opinion, to help sway world policy.
Thank you, Karina, and thanks for raising this issue because we need to make that difference, right? We're talking throughout the lecture about the American administration, and there's a big difference between normal, average people like your good self and others in the administration. And I think many people share our plight that this is an unnecessary war, that this is something that we could have avoided. And we've seen many brave souls in the US stand for that right, even during the a war on Palestine in the last few years throughout US college campuses, protests, and how could you steer change? I mean, look, you have an election in a few months. I think if you can change the mindset and to bring in elected officials that can then support a more sane foreign policy that would serve all of us, American people and people abroad. Uh, it's unfortunate that normal people get stuck in between when, we have much more that unites us than that divides us.
Thank you.
So much. Now I will request Dr. Myronis for his vote of thanks and concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Badr. It has been an honor that we have you on this topic at very crucial time when the region is going through a massive conflict. At the same time, there is a lot of discussions on the transformation and resetting for security and defense relations with the world, which we have been talking for almost 1 month. I must congratulate you and thank you very much for your clarity of thoughts. And also, I'm quite happy to see the positivity which you have in the regional cooperation. Even if it is very difficult time, since you have all of Gulf countries have been attacked by Iran, but still your optimism and discussions on cooperation, and as you rightly have said that nobody is going anywhere. You are going to stay there for forever, and Iran is also going to stay there forever. So that is a big ray of hope that there will be a kind of regional cooperation and regional mechanism. And I think that young scholars in the Gulf region, as I have listened your discussion and other friends in the region, they have become much more aware and sensitized on how their region should be more autonomous in its own decision making and should have its own all the affairs in its own control. So I think that this crisis is very difficult crisis, but at the same time, it could be an opportunity to create a regional mechanism and regional cooperation. So thank you very much for informing us, for educating our Indian audience. I would like to have you again on this platform and would like to host you in person when you visit New Delhi or Indian city next time. We would love to have you for longer chats and discussions. And as you rightly said, that India and Kuwait and India and the Gulf region have a shared civilizational values and longer relations and even family values, as you have rightly pointed out. So this is going to deepen and strengthen in coming months and years more. So thank you very much once again, and hope to see you once again in Delhi and on Zoom as well. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for everyone who has participated.
Yes, thank you. With this, we announce the end of this session. Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
जी डॉक्टर साहब रुकिए जरा सा